everyone. This is Sincere of Teacher Sincere's channel, and welcome once again. So it's been a month now, and I'm back, and I'm going to talk about a book I just finished up last night called Jubilee by Margaret Walker. Jubilee is considered an American classic, not like classic from the last century, but it's a classic. It's considered a classic because I guess it's literary level, and it basically tells the story of during the time of slavery, antebellum times, and the Civil War and Reconstruction. And it is set in my state of Georgia, and it is the story basically of Vyry. Vyry, her full name is Elvira Dutton, and she is a mixed race woman, and the novel starts out with the death of her mother, who was the mistress of the slave master John Dutton. The novel I feel has a sort of slow build to it. It's kind of slow maybe. For some people it might seem slow, others it might not. But the novel initially does not focus a lot on Vyry. She really does not come into her own about midway in the novel. Okay, it's more an array of characters. Okay, whites and slaves. Okay, it actually focuses more on her father and her father's family, John Dutton, more than it does about the slaves. Okay, so there's like a build to it, a building of characters, and then Margaret Walker sort of gets into her stride. I think it's a good novel. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. It was not like I mentioned in the previous video I made that I used to read these novels set, these slave novels set back in antebellum times that were very salacious and everything, like Mandingo and these other ones. No, this one is not like that. It's pretty much a very clean read. It is, but it's also a very important read. Like I said, it's set in my state of Georgia. This book means a lot to me. It has come to mean a lot to me because it actually mentions my hometown where I currently live here in Georgia, and it also mentions like the Barrow plantation slavemaster family, Barrow family. And my mother's maiden name was Barrow, B-A-R-R-O-W. So when I told my mother about it and that it mentions my hometown here, my mother wasn't born here. This is my father's hometown and my hometown. She got really excited because she was like, maybe that was family. And I told her, I don't know, it could be just the slave master's family. She said, well, true, it could be. Because during slavery here in the United States, the slaves were given the surnames of their slave masters. But anyway, the novel was published in 1966. And Margaret Walker, this is her only novel that she ever wrote. She only wrote one novel. She was basically a poet. And she was a part of what was called the Chicago Black Renaissance, which was sort of a follow-up to the Harlem Renaissance that had been in New York City in the 1920s and 1930s. The Chicago Black Renaissance, which was also a literary movement, was in Chicago from the 1930s to the 1940s. And it had included people like Gwendolyn Brooks, who was the first African-American to get the Pulitzer Prize, and people like Lorraine Hansberry and others, Richard Wright. Richard Wright was also a part of the Harlem Renaissance in New York, so, along with Langston Hughes, Ralph Ellison, what's his name? Wallace Thurman, and others, Zora Neale Hurston. So, when you think of Chicago today, big change. When you think of Chicago, you think of every weekend about 40 or 50 shootings, and it's like, what happened to my people? Okay, what happened? So, but yeah, there was a lot of promise back then with this literary movement in Chicago, and Margaret Walker was a part of it. Okay, but it took her around 30 years to write this novel, and it is basically a fictionalized account of her family. Okay, so and it takes place here in Georgia and also in Alabama, the neighboring state of Alabama to the west. So I really, like I said, I enjoyed the book. I recommend it that Americans read it. Okay, it's really good. It's a part of the history of this country, and it's very important. She talked a lot about food. My mouth was practically watering at times when I was reading the book. My mouth was watering, and it's just great. And the book also showed the tragedy of slavery on both sides. The mindset of the whites that thought like, oh, we're better than, this, and we're actually doing the blacks a favor because they couldn't take care of themselves, and the Bible tells us to do this, and blah blah blah, and everything. And Jubilee the word Jubilee actually comes from the Bible, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that. So Jubilee actually comes from Jubilee mentioned in the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament. Okay, it was like the Jubilee year in the Bible was when the ancient Israelites would actually it had to do with letting go of certain things, okay, and freeing up certain things. And one of them, they had the Sabbath rest. I'm looking at my computer here. They had homecoming, liberation, forgiving debts, and also setting free Israelite slaves. Okay, it says here, I'm looking at this now. The Bible, it wasn't clear who were the slaves, whether it was Israelites. I was thinking actually that it might be the slaves of neighboring peoples. Okay, but slavery was not supposed to be perpetual and generational like it was done here in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, but basically Jubilee comes from that, because the book goes from antebellum times, from the time when Vyry is a little girl. She grows up without her mother, basically orphaned, because she's not acknowledged by her white slave master father. I mean, he wasn't mean to her, but he just sort of like, even though he was, kind of attached to her late mother, he had his white wife. And, even though, Vyry looked like, like basically the twin of his daughter with his white wife, he just didn't acknowledge her, and he refused to free her. Okay. And so the book, basically, you start seeing character development with Vyry almost about midway in the book. Okay. So it, like I say, it's kind of, the book focuses a lot on her father's family, his white family. Starts out with the death of her mother. And then, it's just a whole odyssey. Okay. It's a whole odyssey. You see Vyry starts from like a frightened, nervous little girl, very clingy like, not raised by her mother, but by these other black women on the plantation. And, everybody that she loves almost, she loses them. Okay, as she grows up, she loses them. But as time, things sort of levels out in her life, and things become a little bit more stable. But it's never stable being slave. You go through the Civil War years, and then Reconstruction, and the slaves basically trying to adapt to a whole new world where they're free, but not free, because the white people are still trying to hold on to their power, and they're afraid that, that it's going to be, they're worried about all these different things that, it's a whole new world for everybody. And it's it's just a book you need to read. Like I said, I recommend this book. Every American should read this book. Okay, every American should read it. And if you're interested in American history, read this. When I read it, I just feel like, this is probably like what my ancestors had to go through with. Survival after the Civil War. So much promise and hope that we would be free, and then, the whites like building up the barricades, like get these black people away from, keep them away, and afraid that they're going to get too much power and rule the whites and all of this. So it's really an impressive book, like I said. And at times I felt like when reading it, the characters at the beginning some of the characters were kind of cardboard. I felt like they weren't really developed and fleshed out. But as time, more and more, particularly Vyry, and the two men in her life that she loved, Randall Ware and Ennis Brown, they were more fleshed out. Some of the prose scattered throughout is absolutely beautiful. And like I said, she talks a lot about food. And if you know about Southern cuisine, Southern cookery, okay, it says your mouth will be watering. It's like, and it brought back some of the memories of how my grandparents talked. Because when my grandparents lived here in Georgia, that whole area had been like slave plantation land. So my grandparents were like the grandchildren of slaves. Their parents were born, my grandparents' grandparents were actually slaves. Okay, they were slaves. They were born during slavery. So, but it's really just an interesting book, and I do highly recommend it. And I want to talk about a couple of other little things, okay, about what I'm reading and everything. Okay. Now, an interesting tidbit that I found out about Margaret Walker. Margaret Walker had a run-in, okay. Now, and I also want to mention, she was not only a poet and she wrote one novel, but she also was an academic, okay? She taught at a university. But she had a run-in with this guy. What about? Because her book was written in 1966, was published in 1966, and his was published in 1976, okay? And apparently, she claimed she took him to court, took Alex Haley to court for, I think, copying some ideas from her book, okay? She got him on copyright or something, okay? He had some legal problems with his book, okay? And there was another author I read about that claimed, this other man that claimed that his book, that Alex Haley had stolen material from his book. And as you know, Alex Haley got to be very famous. Too many series have been made about Roots, and Margaret Walker sort of got left in the dust, and the other guy, okay? And I do want to show you this, though. Alex Haley autographed my copy in 1985 when I was a student at the University of Georgia. There's his signature. Also, when I mentioned the Chicago Black Renaissance, I mentioned a poet named Gwendolyn Brooks. And Gwendolyn Brooks was the first African-American to get a Pulitzer Prize for poetry. And for like over 30 plus years, she was the poet laureate of Illinois, okay? I actually met Gwendolyn Brooks. When I was a student at the University of Georgia, she came by Park Hall. Park Hall was like where if you were English major, this is where you went to Park Hall, okay? And this is the flyer, old eaten up flyer when she came. And as you look closely, she wrote in cursive and she autographed the flyer. She wrote on it, to sincere, let's see, Gwendolyn Brooks. Okay? There it is. Okay? And she was one of them in the Chicago Black Renaissance. Now, what am I reading? Okay? Well, I'm currently reading, I'm finished with Jubilee, and I'm focusing now on three other books. Am I right? I think it's three, okay? Before I was reading Memoirs of a Babylonian Princess, Part 1, Volume 1. This is Volume 2. I started this one last night. Okay, after I finished Jubilee, I started this one. Okay, so we'll see how this one goes. I like the first one. Maria Theresa Asmar was born in what is now Iraq. She was a Chaldean Christian woman, and she published her book back in the 1840s. It's a 2-volume work. And I talked about her book previously in another video, and you can go back and look, and I probably will put it again in the description, the links. You can read it for free on Internet Archive. Also, I've gotten back on reading Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This is my first Virginia Woolf I've read, and I'm not disappointed. So I will probably be reading more. When I did a book haul last year, I bought one of her books about Mrs. Dalloway. And so judging by this, which is a fantasy, I really like it a lot. I will be doing a talk about this book in the near future. Also, I don't have a copy, but I started reading Ivan Turgenev's classic, Russian classic, Fathers and Sons. I started reading it, and so I'm sort of at the beginning of it. So far, so good. So I'm waiting to see what that will build to. So I thought I would throw in a Russian classic. I was speaking to one of my students a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about different literary figures. She's a Brazilian lawyer, and she was saying, I don't know why. She said, but I love Russian writers. And I think she's currently reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And so I told her, I said, yeah, I can understand. I said, I love Tolstoy. I love Russian writers. And then we got into a discussion about George Sand, the eccentric, scandalous female writer, a French writer, okay, and I absolutely love George Sand, so I introduced her to George Sand, who was, quite a person in her own right. I also plan, after I'm finished with reading, I'm going to try to stick to a schedule. I get very distracted with books. Books, there's just the books is just endless books, okay? And it's easy to be distracted. I thought I was the only one that would like make a plan and say, okay, I'm going to read these books, and then I get totally off plan. But I was listening to another booktuber the other day, and she says the same thing. Same thing happens with her. She said, I will make a plan that I'm going to read a certain book or certain books, and then I end up reading a whole different group. So the same thing happens with me. So I'm going to try to sort of stick to the plan that I have. I'm going to finish up part 2 of Memoirs of a Babylonian Princess. Go ahead and finish up Orlando and also Fathers and Sons. Each time I finish one, I'm going to talk about it. And then earlier in the year, you may look back, I did a book haul about, I bought all these books for I bought maybe over $200 worth of books, and I got them for maybe $45. They were all used, some of them new, and they were by Palestinian, mostly Palestinian writers, but also a Jewish and one British writer. And this is about Middle Eastern history, because I want to get a better understanding of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Okay, I have a sort of a generic understanding, and I probably know more than, say, the average person where I live. But I want to understand the complexities more of this issue. I've been looking at podcasts, for the last 9 months to get a better understanding. So what I knew 9 months ago, I have more knowledge now than I did 9 months ago, and that's a good thing. I've been doing all of that, and this is what I plan to do. Also, I want to give you a quick update about my friend Walla from Gaza. I had not heard from her in a while, and I didn't know whether she had just gotten down and out and depressed, whether they had starved to death, whether they had been killed. I didn't know. So yesterday in the morning, I actually got a message from her, and I just couldn't believe it. She and her mother are no longer in Gaza. They are in Lebanon now. They were able to go on Hajj. They went on Hajj. Hajj is if you don't know what Hajj is like the religious pilgrimage that Muslims want to do at least once before they die. Okay. And so that's the dream of every Muslim, that I can go on Hajj before I die. So, they went to Mecca, the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. She sent me pictures, videos, and they are now living in Lebanon, and of course they can't go back to Gaza. If you're a Palestinian, once you leave these areas, you can't go back. Okay, you cannot go back. And there are other family members living there, including her father. So a lot of Palestinians are scattered. I found out that you've got family, some in the north, others separated in the south. They can't interact with each other, all of that. So, they're in Lebanon because her brother is working on his master's degree. One of her brothers. She had one brother that was killed earlier on in the war. He and his wife, pregnant wife, and young, toddler daughter. This brother is studying in Lebanon, and so she and her mother are staying with him and his family. She told me she told me they got a grant from the King of Saudi Arabia to go on Hajj. And I asked her, I said, well, how did you manage to get out of Gaza? I said, because I heard that it's like $7,000 to $8,000 a head to get out. Family had to raise enough money for like $7,000 to $8,000 per person to get out of Gaza. Okay. And now the Rafah crossing from Gaza to Egypt has been destroyed. So, how did they get out? She said, well, it wasn't easy, but they got out. So, life is something else. It really, you just don't know the way life will turn. Okay. You just don't know. I I was telling one of my students today that lives in Mardin in Eastern Turkey that, you know, right now it's no way I can afford to travel. I can't afford to travel. I'm just a poor teacher trying to hang on here in the United States. Okay. The economics here in the United States is not good. And so, I was telling her, you just never know, because I said, I would love to visit Mardin. I said, you know, if you have a tourist visa, for Americans that lasts 3 months. So I said, I would love to just take that 3 months and travel, Mardin to San Lurfa or they call Urfa, and also to Diyarbakir, I think, and also Kars. I have a friend that is a professor in Kars. So, you just never know with life, you know, you just have to go with the flow. I always figure, don't do a lot of long-term planning. I don't do a lot of long-term planning, long-term goals. There are things I would like, you know, to do. You know, Christians used to say, like, God willing. You don't hear that much, particularly with Western Christians. God willing. You heard it more with the older generation. God willing is basically what the Muslims say, what Arabs and Muslims say, inshallah, God willing. So, you just don't know with this life. You don't know, if you would ask people in Gaza, would your area be destroyed like this? They would have told no. They couldn't even imagine it, even though they were living next to, you know, area that was hostile to them and was bombing them periodically anyway. But you just never know. And you just, you know, have to be patient with life and do your best and all that, you know. So, you know, who knows? You know, who knows where you'll end up, you know. So I'm continuing to reading. I'm continuing to read. Last week I took a break and I said, you know, I'm working. I have other things I have to do, but I'm going to put in some time with my reading, because this book, Jubilee, is due back on Friday. I have to turn it in. So I wanted to try to finish reading it so I wouldn't have to recheck it out. I doubt if anybody else was going to read it. I doubt if anybody was racing to read Jubilee, but they're missing out on a treat, and I do highly recommend it. And like I said, I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. But anyway, I'm between students, I'm between lessons, and I just thought I would do this video here in the late afternoon. We're going through a heat wave here. So the heat wave started last week, hot and humid, more like mid-July than late and early July. So this is the first day of July. So happy July. And so I will be back in the coming future, and I will be either talking about, I don't know which one I will finish first. Maybe I will probably the smart thing for me to do is to go ahead and finish up Orlando first, because I'm further in it than I am. I'm not so far in it, but I'm further in it than I am with this one, Memoirs of a Babylonian Princess. And then I will, finish up Fathers and Sons, which is not very long. It's not very long. And then I will probably move on to Edward Said's memoir, Out of Place. So, anyway, I'm going to end here. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. So this is Sincere.